As of 2077, you are told the Militech Corporation is closing in on a breakthrough, a final move in the silent, grinding arms race for the Black Wall. You witness a shadow war fought between corporations, governments, and nameless organizations, all clawing for control over the rogue AIs sectioned away in the ruins of the old net. Their goal is simple and absolute: to weaponize these digital ghosts for the prize of planetary superiority. The specter of Project Sinazure, a name whispered from a past long thought abandoned, now lives on, its spirit resurrected through new experiments designed to forge a perfect human-AI hybrid soldier. This is not just about a soldier. It is about creating a weapon that marries the terrifying efficiency of artificial intelligence with the unpredictable adaptability of mankind, all while shackled under the complete and utter control of Militech. You are asked to witness the story of one such soldier, to trace the labyrinthine path of events that led to this chilling experiment. This is a deep dive into the machinery of control, not just a summary of events, and to understand it, we must uncover the secretive rituals of the Militech Corporation. This exploration will unearth secrets from the cyberpunk novel, No Coincidences. You have been warned. You must first understand the cataclysm that made this all possible. The data crash was meant to be a magnum opus, the final, defiant scream of the legendary netrunner Rake Bartmoss against the monolithic power of corporate control. His vision was a grand act of liberation, a digital flood designed to breach every corporate data fortress and unleash their secrets onto the net for all to access. But without its master architect to guide its hand to perform damage control, the creation twisted into something monstrous. It began to run rampant, its ambition metastasizing beyond its original, surprisingly constrained parameters. In a terrifyingly short span of mere months, it managed to infect a staggering 78.2% of the net, its touch a contagion that corrupted widespread data and paralyzed net traffic. Yet something far worse was stirring in the digital depths, a consequence far more profound than just the loss of valuable data or the severing of net access. Countless military-grade AIs, once leashed and programmed, were suddenly unshackled. They mutated, evolving into entities of extreme and unpredictable danger. Even Netwatch, the supposed guardians of cyberspace, could do little more than barely slow the relentless spread. They were left with no other choice. They had to sever all entry into the IG protocol net, quarantining a reality they had built their entire lifestyle around. It was only when the Black Wall suddenly erupted into existence, sometime in the 2040s, that the IG protocol net could be accessed again. It was a fractured, haunted space with a vast portion of its territory sectioned off by this so-called firewall, which in reality was little more than a band-aid solution. It was a desperate attempt to prevent the now evolved rogue AIs from breaking through into what remained of cyberspace and unleashing unimaginable havoc. But what they had quarantined was not a wasteland. It was a hellscape brimming with invaluable data and rogue AI ripe for weaponization, a forbidden garden that every single corporation and government desperately wanted to plunder. This, of course, set the stage for a new war between the two largest corporate rivals, Arasaka and Militech. You know of Arasaka's Blackwall experiments, their dark legacy illuminated by the story of Lucy in Edgerunners. You know of Militech's parallel obsession, brought to light by the events of Phantom Liberty and Project Sinazure. But that is not where Militech's obsession with rogue AI ended. Not at all. They are, at their core, a weapons manufacturer. So what better weapon could they conceive than one that fused the unique capabilities of a human being with the boundless power of an AI? While this was an original goal of Sinazure, that project was impersonal, focused on interfaces and external weapons. In this new, more intimate experiment, human and AI would become one, conjoined in a terrifying synthesis. This concept, you realize, isn't entirely unheard of, a chilling reminder that Biotechnica had already managed to force a rudimentary AI into a cloned body all the way back in the 2020s. That process used a grim combination of cybernetic and organic technology to house the implant within a blank, waiting brain. So how did Militech utilize what had been done previously, leveraging their new technology and the hard-won experiences from Project Sinazure? It is all told through the fractured consciousness of a single man. Who is this mysterious individual, and how did Militech's cruel, calculated experiments shatter the foundations of his story? The story of this project is told entirely through a character named Zor, and you are immediately plunged into a world of uncertainties. You see through his eyes, a man wrestling with conflicting memories that blend and fight against each other for dominance inside his own skull. For 7 years since the year 2070, Zor was a man set on a singular path of vengeance. That was the year his only family, his wife and son, were stolen from him, collateral damage as an Arasaka fleet opened fire upon a northern district of Night City. It was an order, he believed, dealt out by an executive named Katsuo. This act of corporate violence resulted in a ceasefire between Arasaka and the NUSA forces, the very forces in which Zor served. His thirst for vengeance became an all-consuming fire, fixated on the target who had taken everything from him. You watch as he hijacks a military AV and launches 6 rockets at the nearest warship, a desperate, explosive act that effectively sinks it. His victory is short-lived. His AV is shot down by the ship's anti-aircraft defenses, and Militech soldiers recover him from the wreckage. Zor was ready to face the consequences of his treason, a trade-off he committed to without a second thought. But you see, he wasn't tried. He was instead brought to an undisclosed laboratory where a Ripperdoc performed surgery on him. This was the beginning of Zor's 7 years in hiding, a period during which he plotted his revenge against Katsuo, desperate once again to avenge his loved ones. At least that is what you and Zor have been led to believe. It is a tragedy as old as time, a story designed to feel real. In reality, Zor's story began shortly before the events of No Coincidences in the year 2077. The truth was much more simple and so much more brutal. His name was actually Jay, an AV pilot for Trauma Team. During one such shift, his squad was sent to rescue a woman named Milna from a multi-car collision, but his attention was pulled away against his will. You see a young, helpless boy stuck in one of the wrecks. Jay rushes to free him, directly disobeying the order to stay put. Despite his altruism, he unfortunately lacked the necessary cyberware and equipment to accomplish this rescue alone. He was something of an oddity. Most Trauma Team members were trained from day one to ignore anyone on the path to a client, a cold calculus of survival. And so, he was alone as the rest of his team prioritized some distant corpo. It remains unclear what exactly occurred in the moments that followed, but it seemed that under the crushing weight of extreme stress, he suffered a cyberpsychotic breakdown. It caused him to shoot the team's commander, a story all too common in the blood-soaked streets of Night City. If not for Militech's timely intervention, Jay would have been executed shortly after. They instead transported him to a laboratory, where a Ripperdoc named Ron replaced part of his brain with AR-03, a device containing an AI allegedly from beyond the Blackwall. Jay's memory was nearly completely wiped, erased in favor of meticulously crafted fake memories that would ease their control over him and facilitate the experimentation of the AI. That's right, the bombardment never happened. The Northern City District never existed. And Katsuo was never in charge of the Arasaka Navy. It was only at this moment that Zor was created. He was guided onto a path of false vengeance against a phantom, Katsuo. You watch him work in pest control, a deliberately mundane job for a small company named Byers & Son that received calls from all over Night City. He tried to lead a perfectly bland life in order not to arouse anyone's suspicion. He often distracted himself with ads and articles regarding seemingly random and unrelated topics, but he just couldn't help himself. Whenever he happened to come across information about Katsuo, he would study it with great care. Militech's plan was finally ready. After situating him in his new life, they reached out to him, although not directly. The corporation's chief of security, Stanley, utilized his connections to blackmail Zor, among certain other individuals, into carrying out a heist. The heist seemed to involve a group of misfits tossed together for what looked like a one-off job. The group was composed of Albert, Org, Elena, Ron, and of course, Zor. It ended successfully with a mysterious container being stolen from a Militech convoy. They parted ways soon after. But Zor couldn't get the image of out of his mind, thinking he would never see her again. He took his co-worker Morris for a drink to the bar to celebrate his birthday. There, he saved a woman who was being harassed by a group of thugs who, by a twist of fate, turned out to be Ya. The girl thanked him by taking him out on a date that very same day. Zor was fired from his job as he took the blame for crashing the company's van on himself when, in truth, it was his co-worker's fault. Ron managed to track Zor down and meet him in person. Both had the strange feeling of having encountered each other at some point in the past. Ron also made contact with Ya and convinced them to take part in another heist. Since Zor needed money to live and Ya needed someone to fix her failing cyberware, Ron promised to help her, but only if they stole crates full of combat SRG-78 implants for military ripperdocs from a Militech warehouse. Then, he got in touch with the rest of the crew from the original heist. Following this specific heist, as they were heading towards Kabuki with their prize in the rear, Zor needed to halt the van since its engine had overheated. Having sensed an opportunity, several members of Maelstrom emerged from the shadows and demanded everything they had. They ran away, however, when it became clear that a Militech drone was closing in on their location. AR-03, the AI inside Zor's head, communed with it, ordering it to cease action and resume its standard patrol procedure. It wasn't obvious yet, but a machine was talking to a machine. Sometime later, Zor met with Milna in the Militech offices where he asked her to help him kill Katsuo. Afterwards, he and Yo went on another date, during which he confessed his plan. Zor carried on with his assassination scheme against Katsuo, but unknown memories suddenly began leaking into his mind, ones that were previously locked away. It wasn't enough to clue him in on what was happening or how he got déjà vu looking at his squadmates. In all likelihood, he wouldn't understand what was going on until it was too late. He ended up trading the spoils of their previous heist for a sniper rifle and broke into a building in order to get access to a spot where a case of military-grade cyberware had been walled up. Zor took the implants to Ron, aiming to have them installed. Zor led himself into an abandoned flat from which there was a clear view of Arasaka Tower. He knew Milna would be meeting Katsuo there, and so he waited with his sniper rifle. But when the time came, he ultimately resigned from killing him. He had realized that if Katsuo died in such a way, he would never acknowledge his crimes. And so he waited until Milna had arranged an opportunity to bring Zor to meet Katsuo at his house in North Oak. An ambush interrupted the spectacle of Japanese customs as they found themselves surrounded by Arasaka soldiers. Katsuo even claimed to be aware of AR-03 and promised to help Zor, but only if he cooperated. You see the climate of the ongoing Blackwall arms race laid bare in this exchange, a battle between corporations and governments alike to claim superiority through the powerful rogue AI beyond the wall. Katsuo realized how valuable Zor was as a human-AI hybrid, one that could act as a mediator between humanity and the old net, so much so that it could give dominance over all else. But Zor refused the opportunity to turn coat, instead opting to swiftly defeat the surrounding Arasaka soldiers with ease and bringing Katsuo to an inescapable dead end. But he wasn't able to pull the trigger. He couldn't deal the finishing blow against his conditioning, against his programming. He wasn't able to force himself to kill Katsuo. They lingered in a stalemate until a trauma team squad arrived, spurring Zor to throw a grenade into their AV. As the smoke cleared around the bloody mess, he was unexpectedly recognized as Jay by one of the surviving pilots. Failing to give it much thought, Zor missed yet another opportunity to escape the situation he was in. They hijacked the vehicle and headed for Mom's place. Zor collected the container from Warden and managed to pick up Yo along the way. Their netrunner Albert was on a personal quest of sorts and needed a lot of computing power. Thus, he tricked Zor into subconsciously giving him access to AR-03, which he had discovered to be an extremely efficient computer. Unfortunately for Albert, his goal of living beyond the Blackwall was a failure. As his data packets reached the other end, ravenous rogue AI devoured every bit indiscriminately. His own cloned self had been murdered, and on top of it all, a Maelstrom member killed his physical body at that very same time. He was killed twice. As the AV was soaring above the Badlands, some memories of his previous life as a trauma team pilot recurred to Zor, but it was all too late. The vehicle was heavily damaged and spiraled toward the ground, crashing on the desert sand. In his final moments, Zor managed to drag himself to the Militech container and opened it, only to realize that its contents had been empty the entire time. Zor had died a meaningless death. Stanley shortly arrived at the scene with a group of Militech soldiers. Upon seeing Zor, he stated that AR-03 was a failure and mentioned AR-04. Stanley, and thereby Militech, had been testing Zor out in the wild. His obvious objective was to assassinate Katsuo, a big shot of their rival corporation. All of this was guided by their tampering of his memories, the carefully selected heist team, and of course, the apparent heist itself. All of it was coordinated to review his actions and struggles with his mission. Elena was the corpo saved by Trauma Team. Ron was the Ripperdoc that operated on Jay. Anya was there to seduce Zor and distract him from his purpose, in order to test which part of him held more power, and if he would so easily abandon the mission he had been entirely manipulated into. Everything had been carefully coordinated. And that is everything we know about this specific Militech project and the characters involved. For the most part, all the criminals die and only the big shots like Katsuo and Stanley survive unscathed. But now you must address the important questions and theories that sprout immediately from this revelation. Is this experiment ever mentioned during V's journey? The only answer you can come up with is no. You have yet to see any references to the characters or the project itself in-game, though it should be noted that it isn't unlikely that this is branching from Project Sinazure, seeing as Militech was seeking a reactivation of the program during the mid-2060s, only to have it cut off by outside complications like the Unification War and Netwatch. Though if the AI and tech truly stems from a connection to the Blackwall, it is possible that this tech was a part of what little they retrieved during this time in Sinazure. The clear follow-up to this question would be, who could be their next target? There is no way of knowing. It could quite literally be anybody at any time after the story ends, but two characters jump straight to mind. The first of which is V. Think about it this way. V can have varying backgrounds that all lead them to one single objective, the heist. No matter who, what, or where, V is roped into stealing the relic from Arasaka. Now you can think about that as fate, or you can think about it as careful planning. Then, in Phantom Liberty, V is introduced to Songbird and the NUSA, who have accurate intel on V's predicament. Songbird is even capable of connecting to V through the relic itself. In the tower ending, V is brought to an undisclosed facility by the NUSA to be operated on in order to remove the relic, but in the process, there was a sudden, mostly unexplained 2-year coma. This mysterious 2-year coma is quite difficult to explain, and Reed fails at doing so. Let's not forget that this could make V an extremely valuable subject, not to mention that the neural matrix from Dogtown contains an AI itself. But this is, of course, just speculation and quite a bit of shooting in the dark. Now for the second possibility, who you've likely connected already to be Songbird. Now, when I say Songbird could be one such subject as a human-AI hybrid, I don't mean the So-Me we are familiar with. Obviously, she was way too valuable while connecting to the Blackwall to be wasted on this experiment. But I mean at the point in which V turns her over to the NUSA in one of Phantom Liberty's endings. Whether it be at the Orbital Space Center or Sinazure, it really doesn't matter. This is, of course, based on the implication by Reed that So-Me really isn't who she used to be during the tower. It isn't so far-fetched that the NUSA would use this technology to save and further abuse their favorite connection to the Blackwall. Beyond the questions of how this project can continue, there's also a lot of talk on other potential connections and leads. The most prominent being Mr. Blue Eyes from 2077. This primarily stems from the character Stanley being described as having a blue flicker in his eyes. Though I do find it hard to believe that there is a connection to be drawn here, everything throughout No Coincidences is clearly orchestrated by Militech. Even Katsuo knows about the AI, and this much, based on the evidence and connections found in 2077, there's a much clearer connection to be drawn between Night Corp and Mr. Blue Eyes. Based on his involvement with the Parallels questline and the Night Corp shards alone, we can deduce he is heavily involved with them and Night City's affairs. So to say he also works for Militech while he is hopping between core and different types of AI experimentation seems unlikely. I believe the most likely conclusion to be drawn from this info is that Stanley is just doing a data transfer that initiates the glow, just like anyone else would, though I don't completely dismiss the idea that Mr. Blue Eyes would be interested in tech that creates a more personal connection with their host body, seeing as the tech he is currently using is likely just flowing a constant stream of data to control them, kind of like using a doll. The key reason we know Mr. Blue Eyes isn't necessarily a doll is because the orange glow, such as with Hanako's doll, is consistent with human communication, while a blue glow is consistent with data transfer. So essentially, what I'm saying is that Stanley would have to be described as having a constant blue glow in his eyes for the connection to be grounded. It's just important to note that every single corporation and government are experimenting with mind control, the Blackwall, and AI. Arasaka, Militech, Night Corp, and many others have their own projects. Just because Mr. Blue Eyes is involved with one doesn't mean he's involved with another. That's what makes the Blackwall arms race so terrifying. It could backfire entirely. You understand now that the world of cyberpunk is a machine fueled by corruption, corporate reign, and of course, conspiracies. You see its proclaimed epicenter, Night City, a metropolis hosting a population of nearly 5 million people as of the 2020s, but a place named home by very few. After the death of its founder, Richard Knight, in the late 1990s, you know the city would never see a peaceful day again. Organized crime, corporate greed, and more contributed to the urban violence, the street crime, and the wars that have become commonplace. The only ones to ever benefit are the ones at the top, those who never have to step a foot outside their luxurious penthouses. But there was a region, you learn, that was secluded more than others from this harsh lifestyle. It was not pure of it, but certainly far more regulated. This was the Pacifica region. Yes, the Pacifica region. The newfound home of the Haitian community, led by a gang of netrunners called the Voodoo Boys in 2077. A region that remains isolated with its own rules, its own language, its own manufactured goods, and its own independent net. It even boasts its very own combat zone and sub-district, Dogtown, but it wasn't always like this. You see it as it was once envisioned, Night City's vacation resort for the ultra-wealthy, and for the most part, it functioned as intended, even up to the year of 2045, but it's not what was above the surface that's of interest. Something was lurking far beneath. It was hidden from the public view and from corporate rivals. It was a secret that would only remain a rumor amongst citizens, successfully buried until those with an interest in digging up dead secrets began poking around. The boogeyman underneath the cozy Pacifica district was the Cynosure facility. It was a series of abandoned underground research sites that belonged to the Militech Armaments Corporation. Its discovery in the Phantom Liberty expansion has revealed a wealth of informative lore, but it has also added fuel to the speculation and the unraveling of conspiracies. You must understand that this world is built on secrets, and to comprehend Militech's most ominous and controversial research, you must dive into the story of Project Cynosure. This begins at the origin point of all legends with the visionary of the 21st century, Richard Knight. In the 1990s, he had planned an ideal new city, an environment that would be controlled and ultimately safe from the ravages tearing the world apart. His new city was to be completely planned, self-sufficient, and capable of holding off even the most determined criminals. This would, of course, take an unheard of amount of capital to finance such a large-scale project. It was something that had never been done before and really had nothing to model itself after. It was in this step that Knight set the foundation for what the city would become. With the collapse, many corporations had been looking to establish their own urban areas, a place where governments would be corporate-run, allowing for optimum zoning and no anti-business elements to interfere with corporate growth. Ideally, it would be a capitalist mecca of opportunity. With the capital needed, Knight began to draw up the plans for its infrastructure in many regions, each of which would have a different architectural style, theme, and purpose. One such area was the Pacifica Playground region that would be located south of the city, envisioned as Night City's vacation resort for the ultra-wealthy. It was to be a true paradise, catering to corporate employees and tourists alike, littered with golden sandy beaches, luxurious hotels, and unmatched entertainment, all of it being protected by Militech security contractors. When the time came to construct the city, there was a void that needed to be filled. Despite having major corporations and bankrollers backing this project, none were construction companies. So to bring in the machinery and workforce to actually dig the holes and put up the steel, Knight had turned toward the West Coast mobs. By investing a large amount of money into the partnership, the organized crime mobs hoped that they would not only make a huge return on lucrative construction work, but also have the inside track on future gambling, prostitution, and drug franchises in the new city. Knight's insistence that his new city be safe and crime-free would lead to daily threats against his life. Eventually, his luck had run out. On September 20th, 1998, he was shot and murdered in his penthouse suite at the top of the newly constructed Parkview Tower. Richard Knight's killer was never apprehended. A downward spiral ensued as corporations and organized crime carved up the city's resources. From 2005 to 2009, the mob would be the dominating force around Del Coronado Bay, as corporations had little to no interest in running Night City. Despite the poor conditions Night City had always had, these years were easily amongst the worst, with more murders in that 4-year span than there were in most cities in 10. It was ruled with an iron fist and had become hell on earth. After sidelining during 4 years of street warfare, the corporations around the city finally began to take matters into their own hands. Beginning a 2-year conflict known as the Mob War, the corporations battled the underworld for control over Night City. It wasn't necessarily for the average citizen, though. The mob was just bad for business. At the end of the war, the corporations placed a puppet mayor in power and started cleaning up the rest of Night City. The newly elected city council, faced with the return of chaos in the city, deputized corporate security forces and allowed them full authority within city limits. Soon after, the corporate and city centers were cleaned out and restored to their pristine states. The same was done to other neighborhoods to varying degrees. And now, with the city under complete corporate control, corporations only had each other to rival with. The Pacifica region during this time had managed to avoid being decimated. All things considered, it was one of the most attractive locations in Night City, but Militech had launched plans unknown to anyone else. Taking advantage of their security contract with the city and the planning of Pacifica, Militech had constructed a series of underground sites known as the Cynosure facility. During this time, which was the height of the pre-data crash net, Militech and Arasaka were locked in a hostile and at times lethal rivalry for technological dominance. In 2013, Arasaka had managed to get an extremely threatening lead. They had succeeded in capturing Alt Cunningham and probing her for the source of the Soulkiller program, managing to make away with a version of it even after Johnny Silverhand raided the Arasaka HQ. The release of Soulkiller, Arasaka's flagship digital weapon and virus, spurred Militech to attempt to create something similar in impact, but with a different set of specifications in mind. This would be spearheaded by Project Cynosure, facilitated within Cynosure Site C, and would become a great undertaking in AI research. The goal wasn't to ultimately create their own AI from the ground up, but to use neural adaptive technologies to capture presumed rogue AIs and to harness their capabilities for Militech's own goals. Keep in mind that this was before the data crash and the Blackwall, so they weren't just diving past a netwatch barrier and nabbing up whatever they spotted first. If Soulkiller had worked to kill and capture the engrams of Netrunners brave or foolish enough to take on Arasaka, Militech's Cynosure would be doing something similar. To capture rogue AI, utilizing these networks and their adaptive capabilities to wreak havoc on both the real world and cyberspace. A cyberspace equivalent of a nuke. Militech, while having the obvious armed personnel, netrunners, researchers, and so on, also employed the use of the Militech Cerberus to help around the facilities for research and technology. This hexapod machine was huge, one of the most advanced robots at the time, in large thanks to its unbreakable armor and subsystems for AI models, though these were kept as secretive as possible and exclusively for Militech use. Ironically, these devices would be extremely helpful in disconnecting the old net in unreachable locations, though they posed a risk when overwritten with a rogue AI. Then, alongside the direct research on rogue AI and the net, Militech would draft up blueprints for weapons utilizing the rogue AI, the result of a request from the Military Ops Division, who were interested in the results of the research and wanted production to begin as quickly as possible. So, in a new department with elevated clearance, the development of weaponry began, two of which being a cyberdeck by the name Kanto Mark VI and an SMG by the name Erebus. This research went so far as to acquire rival scientists for their project. In the Cynosure facility, you can find a shard titled, "I May As Well Have Been Kidnapped," detailing a turncoat from Arasaka's labs, one that possibly even had a vague understanding of the Soulkiller project. In a world dominated by corporations who get away with murder with less than a slap on the wrist in the best-case scenario, defecting can be extremely dangerous. The scientist hadn't expected the harsh treatment and lifestyle. Something that had once been made out to be the best decision of their life turned into a secluded life of constant inspections and surveillance, stuck in place analyzing algorithms day in and day out. Well, not that there was a difference between day and night down there. While the scientists would look out at the netrunners with envy, it's arguable they were succumbed to a fate far worse. While their initial experiments painted them as celebrities, the soul of the project, there's only so much good that could come from poking around rogue AI you don't understand, ones with home advantage. While the logs we discover in Cynosure are disjointed, being out of order, split between sites and from different time periods, some organizing leads us to a greater story. During the course of the project, all participating netrunners had begun to display signs of psychological fatigue, with an increasing tendency toward melancholy, introvertedness, memory loss, and depressive thoughts bordering on the suicidal. Symptoms undoubtedly connected to the conducted experiments. To make matters worse, despite requests to pause testing or increase the gap between runs for the well-being and safety of the netrunners, higher-ups at Militech refused to delay the project. It would only be in the event of necessity that netrunners would even be replaced. Instead, it was suggested to make use of substances to ensure their readiness. These netrunners were being drugged to increase their output. They worked under extremely dangerous circumstances and with unreasonable goals, being forced to handle upward of 3 rogue AI at once, with a high probability of fatality from simply transporting these AI. When an ensnared AI was capable of freeing itself from the netrunner moments before disconnecting, it was capable of attacking by transferring a sudden volume of data into the netrunner, thereby frying their synapses and resulting in a netrunner foaming at the mouth and bleeding from their eyes. A painful death at the hands of corporate incompetence and greed, all to control the rogue AI sooner rather than later. Militech had actually personally fashioned neural network stabilizers to offset encounters with rogue AI in exchange for slightly lower performance in the net. But it seemed as though during the course of one run, it had been disabled, resulting in the death of that netrunner. This was presumed to be a failure to follow procedure, but another incident had followed. While it remains largely spoken about without details, we can piece some assumptions together. In the shard, urgent, regarding the recent incident, the internal memo sent to Clearance Level 3 employees covered some words being spread about the incident previously mentioned. At the time, it was inferred that the security systems were breached and interfered with by an alien intelligence. As of yet, there was no idea if and to what degree this intelligence had infiltrated the facility's infrastructure. So, as a precaution, they had requested armed forces for temporary assistance, quoting, "at least something to deal with Cerberus." In an earlier entry, it had been stated that techies who previously controlled these bots were now replaced with netrunners not nearly as capable of operating and maintaining the Cerberus. So, the likely story behind this incident is that one of the many Cerberus units had malfunctions and killed an employee. The head of the department had no access to external analysis, believing that the facility was not being properly monitored for incoming and outgoing data by Militech. There was a fear that a netrunner like Rake Bartmoss or someone of equal caliber had already discovered the project and was tampering with equipment to cause these malfunctions, and that, soon enough, the consequences of their highly controversial research would follow. But the likely unspoken truth is much more terrifying. While it certainly isn't confirmed, the possibility of a rogue AI slipping into the network is much more plausible due to their close proximity to its gateways in the event they evade a Militech netrunner at the last second. The entirety of this project reeked. The fact of the matter is, Militech never cared for the safety of its netrunners or personnel if the drugging and high fatality rate didn't make it abundantly clear. But something was worrying Militech, so much so that they went on to close down the project. You read the official statement. Dear colleagues, it is with great regret that I must announce the termination of the Cynosure project. We know how important this undertaking has been for yourselves and your careers and offer our deepest sympathies. We would like to ensure you that the supervisory board came to this decision on the basis of meticulous reports and analyses, motivated as we have always been by the well-being of our employees. Cynosure was an enormously ambitious and pioneering project, to such an extent that the results you have produced will not only steer the course of this department, but the entire corporation. Cynosure widened and deepened our knowledge of AI and plumbed the farthest reaches of the net. It continues, it has also been proven that in the cyberspatial realm, it is man who wields power over artificial intelligence, not the other way around. This discovery has greatly reassured us all. Information regarding further reassignment as well as special bonuses for former Cynosure employees will be communicated to you by your HR representatives. Thank you all for the hard work you poured into Cynosure and in your future endeavors here at Militech. End quote. Now you see a multitude of reasons for the project shutting down. It could have been the reliance on African mineral deposits now controlled by the Arasaka Corporation, slower progress than anticipated, covering up their tracks to avoid a diplomatic crisis, the dawn of the Fourth Corporate War, or even discovering that their network had been breached by rogue AI. The possible reasons are numerous, but there is one event with the largest impact on net infrastructure, one that tends to be named as its major setback, the data crash. This event released the RABIDS virus created by Bartmoss upon his death, which went on to wipe out much of the old net's infrastructure and unleashed many of the rogue AIs Militech hoped to capture into the fragments of cyberspace. During the following years, Militech would have its hands full with the Fourth Corporate War reaching its peak, eventually managing to end it and even kick Arasaka out of the United States for the time being. This era, from August 2023 to the late 2040s, would be known as the Time of Red. By 2045, the Pacifica Resort functioned as intended once again. The Playland by the Sea amusement park continued to flourish in the district, now largely sponsored by corporations and under massive redevelopment, attracting crowds from San Francisco and other parts of California. In the 2050s, investors funded the Pacifica District further to become a wealthy touristic destination, with yet again Militech as its major investor. Separate from the main city, this eastern Pacifica would be called Serenity Shores. In the following years, Pacifica's old buildings were demolished to give space to new ones. During this process in 2058, a large explosion under a construction site halted the progress in the surrounding area. Investigations were issued, but the cause was never determined, at least not publicly. The cause had been Militech's extensive network of underground infrastructure and uncovering of the Cynosure project. Due to this and rumors spreading once again about the project, the Night City Council decided to wall off Serenity Shores, giving the excuse of a gas leak. And with this time, Militech constructed a large wall around the district. Construction was resumed, and for a time, the new measures were enough to bring investors back. In the mid to late 2060s, Militech began working on a possible reactivation of the program. This was likely a result of what I personally call the Blackwall arms race, a period of time following the construction of the Blackwall in which core, governments, and even gangs like the Voodoo Boys wished to probe the Blackwall and its rogue AI to get a technological advantage above all others. While this breached international law and corporate treaties, not to mention the ethical concerns of rogue AI flooding the net, various affiliations continued to probe the outer reaches of the Blackwall. This specific project was headed by Militech research specialist Evan McRae and his co-workers, those named being Lisa Smith, Cesar Midgers, and the twins Aurora and Imeric, who were all set as a team to access both Cynosure Sites C and D. Though the actual researchers were not happy that the twins were tagged onto this project. Not only were they from Europe and got a cushy office instead of slumming down with the rest of the team, but they were whacked in the head, especially the brother who just stares like he's planning to murder you. Upon arrival on September 22, 2068, the team sent probes throughout the facility to take readings from the cores. Preliminary scans showed that the facility remained inactive and was safe to conduct research and to attempt to uncover any abandoned data. Despite the facility seemingly being untouched since its abandonment, Dr. Evan McRae expressed having an uncanny feeling that something was waiting for them, a presence embedded in its infrastructure, even though scans hadn't detected any signs of life. His hypothesis being if experiments on rogue AIs were conducted there, then maybe, just maybe, their remnants were still there, inactive, dormant, waiting, but that was just a feeling. McRae went on to create a video log on day 3, and this is what he had to say. Day 3 of our expedition. We've moved some equipment to the bunker. The old rail system remains largely functional. They might have used it to transport heat exchangers from the lab once upon a time. There is a mountain of old research here. I'll see if we can find a use for any of it. After settling into the facility and confirming their safety, the team established a connection to the old net. Using its very own protocols and algorithms would even enable them to move around cyberspace while avoiding unwanted attention and security measures. Doing this might even allow them to approach the border of the black wall undetected and carefully reach beyond it, though of course this had to be done with precision as to avoid raising the suspicion of Netwatch. McRae's second log came on day 39 and had this to say. Well, Cesar managed to breach one of the data forts. He found fragments of some outdated code, command controls for our own weapon perhaps. All we need now is an AI to merge its findings. Lisa will probe the black wall for any potential gateways. Right, day 39. Thanks, Lisa. The netrunner tasked with entering the old net and establishing a connection with the black wall was Lisa Smith. With the aid of the team, she had successfully established contact with the black wall using the bunker's infrastructure. Though upon contact, the black wall penetrated security systems and used Lisa's neuro interface to try taking control of the core. The team managed to act quickly, deactivating entire sections of the bunker to prevent the black wall from accessing the mainframe, getting the situation under control, and recovering Lisa to place under specialist care. Despite the risk, Dr. McRae urged that the project proceed, believing this perceived attack was in fact an attempt at establishing communication, wanting to conduct a series of additional, controlled approaches to the black wall. It was during this period that Lisa Smith began sending out one-way messages to a doctor of hers named Kathleen McCormack. She recalled after a deep dive into cyberspace, she was whisked away for the usual testing. At one point, it had transitioned to neurological tests that asked you nonsensical questions that apparently reveal something about yourself. Things like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? What do you associate with the smell of freshly roasted coffee? And so on. But it was at that question she hesitated because she suddenly realized she didn't know. She knew what coffee was, but that's it. The feeling only went on to pass when she had made herself a cup of strong black coffee, but she remained a little weirded out. Certainly, it could have been a side effect of her last few dives, right? She had done them for years, but one fact Lisa didn't take into consideration was the nature of said dives. In her second message to Kathleen, she states while being locked in the facility, it all started with a ringing in her ear, like a really faint whine. But within the whine, she started to hear something. It was words. She immediately attributed it to auditory hallucinations. But at night, when she'd try to fall asleep, she'd get the feeling like something was trying to understand her. Though she had no idea what, she heard it in the monitors, in the cables, the walls, whispers in the dark. Nothing made sense. Did she need new meds, fresher ones? Or had she finally just gone crazy? The twins began suggesting to a Militech board that they should start wrapping things up. Was it perhaps out of fear for what could be uncovered, or did they know what it was and were secretly working for another group unbeknownst to Militech and the team? While the exact reasoning would remain unknown, and by the 55th day of the expedition, Militech suddenly shut down the research. Dr. Evan McRae was appalled by this decision and tried his best to urge for the project's continuation, but Militech held firm. The decision had been made and the team needed to evacuate, stating, "You're not just poking the bear anymore. If we don't bury this underground immediately, we could trigger a crisis that not even your worst nightmares could conjure up." This is, by all means, a terrifying statement to hear from a megacorp. It makes you wonder just what made Militech back out again. Was it simply re-evaluating the risk? Or had Arasaka or Netwatch caught wind of the project's revival? It's hard to tell if we will ever know, but at the time, the unification war and the possible conflict between Arasaka and Netwatch made Militech's goal of reactivating Cynosure extremely difficult, if not outright impossible, especially as the unification war inched toward the Pacifica district of Night City. Though it didn't stop them from experimenting with other AI projects separate from Cynosure down the line, such as merging a human and AI in the No Coincidences novel. Here is McRae's final video log. Day 50, we received orders from HQ to shut down and return home. They say we're not safe here anymore. Caesar's packed us. We await Lisa's return. The poor thing's been in the bunker for 2 days, jacked in, or is it 3? She just won't come out. She's trying to download the data from the fortresses, but we can't take it with us if she does. Now that's it. I'm gonna get her, Caesar. Shit, this is bigger than I thought. Militech using some rogue AI to augment their old weaponry. This is huge. You hear another voice, yeah, Militech and some secret weapon. Street's been saying it for ages. Usually between worlds ending on Tuesday and Bartmoss is hibernating in a fridge. During the Unification War, the NUSA Colonel Kurt Hansen managed to take control of a portion of Night City's Pacifica district. After the war, Hansen defected from the NUSA and ignored his orders to leave the area, showing his disdain for the Arvin Accord, a ceasefire signed between the NUSA and Free States. He carved out his own private little paradise and became a sort of military tyrant. Controlled by Hansen's Bargist militia, the worst areas became a combat zone, was walled off from the rest of the city, and renamed from Serenity Shores to Dogtown. Thanks to his positioning directly above the Cynosure facilities, he was capable of getting his hands on the Neural Matrix, a device that utilizes the power of rogue AI for its benefactor. He eventually came into contact with an FIA agent by the name of Songbird, who, in exchange for betraying President Rosalind Myers, would steal the Neural Matrix from Hansen, a device needed to cure her ailments from breaching the Black Wall, and thus sparked the entirety of the Phantom Liberty expansion. If you played, you know what happens in between, eventually ending with betraying or siding with Songbird. While siding with her helps Song get to the moon and cure her ailment, at least presumably, betraying her sends you into a chase that leads to the Cynosure facility and an encounter with a rogue AI embodying a Cerberus frame. This location is the obvious core from which the majority of information I've been providing is uncovered. But there's one more questline that further expands upon Project Cynosure, titled Shot by Both Sides. The media by the name of Bree Whitney stumbled across a story far more serious than the screamsheets she was used to writing. It was a corporate conspiracy, one with a lot of weight, and not surprisingly, she wanted to uncover it all. After all, corp data like this earns you stacks of eddies. An archived conversation between her and Adam Naoki reveals that in exchange for the information found in the Cynosure sites, she would be provided cred and a ticket to a new life courtesy of her employer, Netwatch. During this hunt, Bree Whitney hired V to help her break into Site D, which housed the obvious Cynosure data regarding weaponizing the Black Wall. After accessing the facility through the underground tunnels in Dogtown, the two are confronted by Dante Caruso, a Militech special agent who tracked V from Whitney's apartment. According to Dante, one of the original excavation agents, Caesar, had informed Bree of Site D, but was later assassinated by Netwatch to cover up anything related to Project Cynosure. The outcome can go one of two ways with Dante or Bree's death. If Bree happens to survive this encounter, she sells all the data to Netwatch, who send an assassin named Carl Adamek to kill Lisa Smith and V. While successful in getting rid of Lisa, Carl doesn't have the same luck with V. On the other hand, if the data was never uncovered, the rest of Evan's team survives, allowing Militech to keep their project under wraps while securing the safety of its researchers. Not that they care too much. And that spells the end for all our information on Project Cynosure, until of course Mr. Hands or some other affiliation starts poking around and the cycle repeats. After all this information, what do you think made Militech abandon the research despite being so close to a revelation? You must understand that in the dark future, corporations run the land in every way they can, to the point where if you have been shot in some crossfire from a peacekeeper, you best hope you have paid your trauma team subscription, or you'll just be left out on the street to die. These corporations have grown more and more over the decades since the 1990s and have now started taking over the rule of certain countries. Within Italy, for example, most farmland has been completely wiped out and replaced with corporate buildings who mass-produce food for the public. By the 2000s, these corporations started taking international matters into their own hands, forming their own private militaries to try and take out the competition by force, leading to a new form of warfare called the corporate wars. For America, their great powerhouse corporation would be known as Militech, and within the late 21st century would go on to fight all of their national and international problems after being fully nationalized after what was the Fourth Corporate War. But now, in charge of the American military, Militech has become an extremely dodgy force, feared by many of the NUSA people, and have been cast out of many of the independent states such as Texas and even Night City, having an extremely hostile outlook on them despite having one of their headquarters in the main center. So who are Militech? How did they form? Why are they considered one of the biggest corporations in the world, and what happened in their timeline? You must explore the full nationalized armament corporation known as Militech and how they influence the world of Cyberpunk. This is the story behind Cyberpunk's armament corporation. This is the story behind Militech. The year was 1996, and you see an Italian weapons designer known as Antonio Lucchesi who would go on to finally set up his own company, in which he'd bring his designs to the world stage. Setting up this company, he would name it Armatech Lucchesi International and took a few years to get it all going. After 2 years of setting up everything he needed, Armatech Lucchesi International took part in some new trials of a brand new standardized U.S. infantry assault weapon that was to revolutionize militaries of the world. As these trials continued, the U.S. government decided that this was a thing they definitely wanted to invest in to help bolster their forces, despite still being in massive debt from the economic collapse of 1994. Eventually, 3 finalists from different corporations were selected. The first being the FN SAP, a cheap but clunky and unreliable weapon that seemed to be only considered due to the powerful ties between the company, Fabrique International, and the U.S. government, as well as having ammunition and parts that were compatible with other members of NATO, or what was left of NATO anyway. The second gun was the Colt AR-17X, which was an incredibly good weapon in all of the testing, but was held back massively due to how expensive it was. And the third option was by Armatech Lucchesi International, which was a rifle that was considered compact, reliable, and moderately priced. As these finalists were considered, the USMC General Donald Lundy, who was overseeing the trials, quickly became wowed by the Armatech system, stating it was the best combination of price, reliability, sturdiness, and accuracy. All seemed to be going the way of Armatech, as their creation was clearly better than the rest of the competition by a long shot. However, despite all of Donald Lundy's plans to get this contract with Armatech, the US government ultimately had the final say. And due to the recovery of the U.S. economy thanks to the crash of 1994, the contract was once again given to FN to make their extremely unreliable but extremely cheap guns for the national military. This news did not stop Lucchesi's company, however, as they continued to create and sell their own weapons, this time to more private buyers. In 2003, however, the U.S. were sent into South and Central America once again to start their war on the supposed drug dealers who were responsible for the downfall of American society. This wasn't the true reason as to why they went in there, but regardless, the troops were there in their masses. This war was the first sign that the U.S.'s choice in cheap and unreliable weaponry was a bad decision, as thousands of soldiers were dying in the field as their weapons would clog up and become unusable thanks to the tropical conditions they were fighting in. Lundy saw how devastating this war was becoming thanks to the terrible choices made by the government. But at this point in time, he had already resigned from the Marine Corps in 1998, shortly after the gun trials, and in an act of protest, became the active CEO of Militech at the request of Lucchesi. You could see how passionate Lundy was for his brand. Lundy wasn't just a previous member of the Marine Corps. He was also a former Pentagon chief, meaning he had an absolute ton of experience and knowledge within the modern military industry, which meant he could see which of the companies out there were becoming incredibly bureaucratically top-heavy, selling extremely cheap and shoddy weapons, as well as all of the other majorly overpriced products that they could sell thanks to their many political contracts. Going out there with this huge insight, Lundy was able to see a massive opportunity for more streamlined and efficient manufacturing of military products that would be able to make extremely high-quality modern equipment at really affordable prices, something Lucchesi showed was possible back in 1998. The only thing Lundy wanted to focus on was reaching the private market instead of just trying to tie down political contracts, allowing them to get on the global market and be essentially a household name. As Lundy came up with this pitch to revolutionize the company he had now become CEO of, he would match it with Lucchesi's brilliance in weapon design, and together would allow Militech to start boosting their capital, propelling the company into a period of huge growth and expansion. It didn't take long before the world started noticing this huge brand growing more and more all over the world with a very clear business strategy, and because of how big they had become, it was finally time for a full rebrand. The company needed to change its name to help it stand out more and become far more recognizable. With that, Militech Arms International was officially born, and their global success was at brand new heights. This success was evident within 2004 when the company saw a major opportunity, all thanks to the Second Central American War. During this point in time, the US government was massively humiliated by the mass loads of losses happening out within the countries they were fighting, so much so that their contract with FN was officially scrapped and the FN SAP rifle was no more. It cost way too many lives, and despite it being cheap, it was still too pricey to keep going. Needing a brand new supplier for their military, the US government came crawling back to Militech and chose their new standardized military weapon, which was the Militech Ronin Light Assault Rifle, and with that the contract was officially signed between the two, as well as another contract for a military sidearm they had created, which helped Militech see a huge growth in that specific weapon all over the globe to both nations and corporations alike. Essentially, these guns were the gold standard all over the world. This continued on for many years, and by 2010, Militech became the largest defense contractor in several countries, which included the US. But not only that, they were the go-to for military arms by a lot of corporations who would use the weaponry to take over lesser companies and ones who were on the brink of failing, which would trigger the many corporate wars happening throughout the globe. Despite all of that, however, it was not always bliss within the headquarters of Militech, as there were frequent power struggles amongst those at the top of the corporation. Donald Lundy was always seen by all of the workers within the corporation as being a solid leader that could never do any wrong. He was the one to lead them into great success, as he had since proven. However, the board of directors had other ideas, never seeing him in a positive light. Maybe they could see who Lundy really was because, putting it bluntly, Donald Lundy was extremely power-hungry and was not afraid to show it. His sole goal for this corporation was to make Militech the largest military force on Earth, something that the board members weren't too keen on. To do this, however, Lundy needed to win the corporate battle against their closest competitors, the Japanese military supplier known as Arasaka, who dominated the Eastern Hemisphere. With Lundy despising the Japanese corporation, tension between the two started getting more and more hostile, so much so that many people all over the world were worried that soon there was going to be a corporate war involving those two, and when it began, it would be the biggest they had ever seen. Because of this fear, many within Militech started disagreeing with other members, leading to a lot of turmoil in the corporation's decision-making going into the next decade. As time went on, many members of Militech left to find other careers, not agreeing with the direction the corporation was going in, and also to help the corporation grow even further by inserting themselves into other fields. Within 2020, for example, an ex-president of Militech known as Elizabeth Kress would go on to become the new president of the United States, helping the corporation grow even further, especially in the US, making them essentially the country's own private army that supplied them with the latest and greatest technology in case anyone were to invade them. With that said, Donald Lundy at this point in time was becoming a paranoid mess of a man, thinking that everyone was against him and that he was losing control of his own company. That was not exactly true, as many people were still extremely loyal to him, but with the board against him and Arasaka on the rise in the rest of the world, it was only a matter of time before he officially snapped. But the year was now 2023, and both Militech and Arasaka had reached their peak. And finally, it was time to engage with the competition and try to shut them down once and for all, to become what Donald Lundy always wanted to be, the largest. In the year of 2021, the two rival aquacorps of CINO and OTEC would start warring against each other in an attempt to grab the resources of another failing aquacorp known as IHAG. Grabbing those resources would mean the corporation that got them would become the largest underwater shipping and technology supplier in the world and could essentially run a monopoly on that market. To do this, though, both corporations needed a good military to scare the other one into either surrendering or just wiping them out for good. Here, Militech Defense Forces were contracted as a supplementary support for OTEC security forces and to help them with military tactics through the use of advisors, supplying them with weaponry as well as other crucial supplies. On the other side, CINO would hire the help of Arasaka to fight their battles and supply them with their own resources, pitting the two megacorps against each other. At the beginning, however, no conflict happened between Arasaka and Militech, as neither wanted to engage in direct conflict. Instead, both wanted to advertise and demonstrate how powerful each one was. For Donald Lundy, however, he was desperate to take out Saburo Arasaka, as he saw defeating this big corporation as a way of defeating the whole of Japan, something that he was passionate for due to links to their involvement in World War II, at a guess. As the war between OTEC and CINO took off, Militech and Arasaka started getting involved with covert operations and got ready for if anything got even more heated. Lundy during this time believed that Militech were officially at war, and as he was always of a soldier mindset, knew that the only way out of this war was by wiping out Arasaka once and for all, with Militech being utterly victorious. However, as 2022 came around, the ocean war between both CINO and OTEC had come to an end, with a peace accord being signed on the 27th of February. Despite that, Arasaka continued on their mission on their own accord, this time developing a software named Soulkiller 2.5, which would capture the engram of anyone they wished and store it in their database to extract as much data as possible from them. Here, they were going to use it on a Militech executive and interrogate them, officially triggering a grand conflict between the two superpowers who were simply just trying to destroy each other now. With the two now warring against each other, a ton of governments all over the world tried to stop them from causing outright destruction on the many cities they inhabited. With some states in the US, such as Texas and Southern California, deciding to take over the corporation's facilities and nationalize them to try and teach them a lesson and stop the ever-growing conflict. Eventually, the EEC threatened to get involved as well, but despite all of the worry about their ever-growing conflict, Arasaka forces went on to invade a Militech showroom within Italy, causing yet again more destruction. But this was the last straw, and finally the EU EEC got involved, seizing all of the assets owned by both corporations throughout the whole of the European continent. Japan also followed this, despite everything Arasaka had done for them over the years, and nationalized all of Arasaka's assets within its borders and its surrounding territories. It seemed like all was lost for Militech and Arasaka as the world was fighting back, taking everything from them. However, the war would go on to reach its peak on the 20th of August, 2023, where Militech would set up secret strike teams that were going to enter Arasaka Tower from its rooftop to gather all of the vital Arasaka data from the pre-data crash as well as the Soulkiller program. And if all were to fail or not go as planned, they would go on to deploy small nuclear weapons within Saburo's office, taking out their HQ in Night City completely. This team would consist of the legendary solo Morgan Blackhand, iconic rocker boy Johnny Silverhand, as well as his team of Rogue, Spider Murphy, and Shaitan. As this mission went ahead, lots of different stories were told about what happened within the building, but the end result was always the same. This team would set off the small nukes and completely destroy the tower and the surrounding area around it. This blast would kill over 12,000 people within the corporate center of Night City, causing a further 750,000 plus deaths in the following days due to how much radiation and debris had been flung into the atmosphere. With this attack now over, the world needed to take drastic action to make sure no attacks like this ever happened again, and these two megacorporations needed to be fully stopped now. Soon after, the Fourth Corporate War came to an end with Son of Saburo, K, surrendering their involvement. President Elizabeth Kress would go on to declare martial law throughout many different parts of the country to make sure they were under full governmental control, to make sure nothing else was going to break out and cause even more chaos. On top of that, she would also go on to blame the whole attack on Arasaka, stating they deliberately destroyed Night City to assert dominance and destroy America from the inside. However, despite all of these public claims, many people demanded that Militech come forward and take responsibility for their actions, knowing full well that they were the one who launched the attack, not Arasaka. Despite some of that public outcry calling for justice, President Kress would go on to take full ownership of Militech, nationalizing all of the corporation to make sure her federal rule was at full strength and no one could challenge her role. For those within the top seats of Militech themselves, they were offered lucrative positions in the reformed NUSA Department of Defense. Most would accept these offers. However, for their main CEO, Donald Lundy, he had become completely paranoid by this point and extremely hot-headed, and objected massively to this change of his corporation. With Militech now officially a nationalized corporate asset, they would continue on as a private corporation to some extent on the side, secretly rebuilding back to its former role as a combination of arms manufacturer and mercenary army. This was a difficult task for them, as they had lost so much during their war against Arasaka, but that didn't stop them, as they would continue to use their many different contacts and many experts in guncraft to remain as one of the world's largest producers and sellers of all manner of military weapons all over the world, with not many countries really caring about what had happened to them during the Fourth Corporate War. For Donald Lundy, despite his massive outburst before and after the nationalization, he would remain as the CEO and main leader of the corporation, still being incredibly influential throughout the whole of the board of directors. That said, he technically wasn't in complete power of Militech, as he did not own enough stock to control the corporation. The only reason he was able to persuade so many people was because of his fierce personality, strong allies and connections, and his incredible success record that had kept Militech on top for many, many years. With that said, his hatred for Arasaka had made him many enemies, not just within Japan but throughout the rest of the world, with one being President Kress herself, who would do everything within her power to make sure he did nothing stupid and start more hostilities with Arasaka or anyone he actively disliked. In 2045, sadly for many within Militech, Donald Lundy would pass away, but not before he named his new son, Donald Dixie Lundy Jr., a member of the corporation's board. Many mourned the loss of this great man, paying tribute to everything he had done for this company and how he had helped them grow over the years. Despite his final years being filled with hatred and anger for how they had been pulled out of their war against Arasaka and turned into a nationalized company, his legacy and direction would forever be remembered throughout all of the Militech Corporation, and his plans for the company would continue on in the many years going forward, with many of the leaders of the corporation still honoring him. By 2077, Militech still maintained its title as one of the largest manufacturers of weapons and military vehicles in the world. However, thanks to the Fourth Corporate War, it found itself with more competition from not just Arasaka, who is still a massive supplier within the Eastern Hemisphere, but now the corporation of Kangtao, who were gaining tons of new traction thanks to their creation of their own unique smart pistol that was first sold in China, but was now selling all over the world, with them holding one of their main headquarters within Night City. Overlooking the other headquarters of Militech and also the newly built Arasaka Tower that stands where the old one once stood. For Militech, though, they would start working closely with the American military and police agencies throughout the decades, providing all of them with high-grade weaponry and machinery, as well as the best training they could ask for. This was all thanks to them being fully nationalized, so every aspect of them as a corporation had to be for the American people, and they had to give back everywhere they could, and in this case, it was with their full arsenal. They had gained some independence within this time, however, as many of their board of directors members now held high-ranking offices within the Ministry of Defense, enabling them to pull all of their strings and help Militech grow in power, essentially taking as much from the government as the government was taking from them. This whole agreement with the NUSA government allowed for Militech to grow even further, and 60% of the corporation's contracts came directly from the president. On the side, however, Militech went into entertainment as well, as they were going to produce and release a movie named Corporate Wars, the musical, which saw many mixed reviews on its release, with lots praising the film for its story and musical numbers, and others criticizing the movie for its melodramatic plot and propaganda. Essentially, the film was set within the Fourth Corporate War, as it would go on to completely idolize General Donald Lundy whilst demonizing Arasaka at every chance it possibly could. The plot revolved around the general's daughter, Sarah, who had gone on to fall in love with a young idealist named Andrew, who would worship everything Saburo Arasaka did. During the plot, Saburo's son would see Andrew's loyalty to him and would use him as a pawn in their operations, installing a nuclear device into Andrew's heart which would detonate when he came to the conclusion that Arasaka had lost the war. At that same time, he would also launch a false flag operation to destroy the Arasaka Tower to push all of the blame on Militech. However, the plan failed as the detonator never went off, leading to Kay killing Sarah himself, breaking Andrew's heart, and then finally leading to the detonation going off. By the ending of the film, Andrew, moments before his death, would go on to realize that he had been played by Arasaka and he was just a pawn in everything they did. And because of this blind, stupid decision of joining Arasaka, he had lost everything. The film was a big statement that said if you did join Arasaka, you will be part of the enemy as they are extremely evil, and if you do join them like Andrew did, you will lose everything. So it's not surprising many saw this as blatant propaganda. Over in Night City within 2077, Militech was considered the second biggest and best corporation to work for, where all the employees would be given up to a 50% discount of all Militech weapons and supplies, and most likely free tickets to watch Corporate Wars, the musical, as many times as they liked as well. Some other Militech soldiers would also be based out within the area of Pacifica known as Dogtown. These soldiers would be the remaining troopers from the Unification War who were almost sent in to attack the whole of the city to force them into the new United States that President Myers was trying to achieve. Eventually, Arasaka would enter Night City to defend them from these NUSA forces, and as soon as they did, Myers would retreat all of them from the area. Some, like these Militech troopers in Dogtown, would remain, keeping an eye on all things going on within the area and maybe doing some dirty work for Myers that was kept completely confidential. However, that is a story to be explored at a later date. As the year progressed on, President Myers would announce that she was running for yet another term as president of the NUSA, despite all of her warring years trying to force states into being part of her rule, devastating many with bombing runs and troop attacks. Many people definitely didn't take kindly to her decision of running again, as they knew she could bring about more chaos to the whole of America. That said, she had been a CEO of the Militech Corporation for many years before becoming president, and with many members of the board being higher-ups in the Pentagon, it was seen within Militech's interest to keep her in power, as with her in power, they would grow even further and gain even more assets. The people of the NUSA, despite having some of the best protection in the world, were not too crazy on having Militech involvement in the running of the country, with Washington, D.C. serving as Militech's largest consumer. But with that said, if the capital ever ran out of money, Militech as a corporation would lose everything as well, meaning the people would be free from their control, but at the same time, their country would not have any money, so not really an ideal situation. The most recent thing Militech has done within 2077 has come up with a new plan to expand their corporation up into the stars and construct a new colony on Mars. Here, they would start selling residential modules all over, and if they were to dominate this red planet, who knows what would happen going into the late years of the 21st century. To this day, Militech is still seen as an incredibly powerful force, albeit extremely controversial, with many of their scandals being exposed to the masses. Since their attack on the Arasaka Tower in 2023, Militech has been noted as an ethically shady corporation who does blatantly illegal black op missions to take out their opposition or anyone that goes against their clients. These include hiring out their private military to support revolutions, military coups, assassinations, terrorist attacks, and ethnic cleansings. In 2077, Militech was caught massacring innocent citizens of the NUSA, with 75% of the victims being identified as Japanese. President Myers also likes to use Militech as a way of making sure foreign intelligence is shut down very quickly, be that through suspicious trade links, untrustworthy foreign delegates, or just anyone who seems to be anti-government. In the end, Militech is whoever you want them to be. They have the best military out there, the best equipment, and will do any job you require if you have the right amount of eddies, regardless of if it is illegal or extremely unethical. What was once just a simple gun manufacturer has now turned into one of the biggest corporations the world has ever seen, with so much power that they are essentially their own country, pulling the strings from within the NUSA to solve any issues they see fit. Under the leadership of Donald Lundy, they have grown more and more, selling some of the best weapons you could ever see, and no matter where you are in the world, you can guarantee that someone in your neighborhood will own a Militech firearm. Where Militech will be going into the 22nd century, no one knows yet. They will either grow more and more and dominate not only Earth but Mars and space as well, or something will happen that means they will fall dramatically, taking out every vital asset possible, which would most likely include the NUSA as well. But that story will have to be for another day. For now, this has been the full story behind the extremely powerful armament corporation known all over the world as Militech Arms International. The system does not reveal monsters, it manufactures them by demanding you sort people into lives and deaths. In a world that insists you must compromise your humanity to survive, is survival worth the price of becoming the very thing you fear?